Welcome, folks, to The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr. Every week, diving deep into the truth of Catholic social teaching and restoring all things in Christ.
The Uncommon Good is on the air. I'm Bo Bonner.
And I'm Dr. Bud Marr.
We're coming to you from these United States of America, here in the middle of Iowa, Des Moines, the confluence of so many things. Rivers, blackout dates for baseball teams. I don't know if it's a confluence of offense. We can get into all that. But the point is there's a lot that conflues here, Bud. And this is our show, The Uncommon Good. I'm Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr, joining you at this confluence of time on Wednesday. We're glad to have you here with us.
Yeah, Dr. Bud Marr, Associate Provost at Mercy College of Health Sciences. I recently visited Nashville, Tennessee, Bo.
Oh.
And it made me grateful for Des Moines. Like, I'm not dishing on Nashville.
I was going to say, instead of a hot Nashville sandwich, this is a hot Nashville take.
They don't have anything to feel like insecure about. I think actually a lot of Americans want to move there. It's certainly a fun place to visit, but I appreciate the sort of like, so when I was walking in downtown Nashville this past weekend, it's very busy. There's like a lot going on. A lot of music everywhere, and I like our size. I like that there is music, but it's not like every third person is a musician.
I like that. No, well, you know what? You can even get hot Nashville sandwiches, Nashville hot chicken sandwiches here. I used to go down to Chicken Heat down here in the South Side. You have to try this. So I'm the senior advisor and director for the for mission initiatives, I should say, and the director for the Center for Human Flourishing at Mercy College of Health Sciences. They underwrite our show here in Des Moines, and it's like you said, we might not be making every third person a musician, but I don't think you would oppose it if every third person wanted to become a nurse or an allied health person through Mercy College, bud.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of exciting things going on at the college. We talk about this on the show, but you mentioned sonography, radiological technology, physical therapist assistant. And it's cool to be, we've shared this before, but to be a part of that mission and a part of that work, because we go out and about and sometimes you will just like stumble into a student doing great work as a medical professional.
Yeah, so mchs.edu, thank you, Mercy College, for underwriting our show. I know my daughter, I have raised at least one kid, right? She wants to go see Nashville because she wants to go to the Ryman Auditorium and see the mother house of country music. What's funny, right, am I outing too much of your preferences here? You went to Nashville to watch Pearl Jam, which, as people probably listening, that is not country music. Somehow I think this is just very much a Bud Marr trip, that you would go to Nashville to watch 90s rock giant Pearl Jam with some of our mutual friends from back in the day.
It's funny you say that because, so Eddie Vedder, the lead singer for Pearl Jam, he was definitely playing to the crowd, but he said, in the near future, we're going to have to schedule a show at the Ryman. And I don't have the same like country music history knowledge that you do. But like the Nashville crowd went nuts, and I'm guessing if Pearl Jam played there, it would probably sell out. I think it's a more intimate venue at this point, and maybe Eddie could do some of his like ukulele ballads or something, because he does have. I mean,
yeah,
they don't have anything distinctly country, but it sort of leans that direction. And we were joking with another mutual friend that like the definition of country music is pretty broad these days.
Yeah, well, no, right. We probably shouldn't tether Iowa Catholic Radio into Bo's opinions on this. We want to be for everyone. Whatever you think country music is, just you probably don't want to talk to me about it. That's what we're getting at.
Well, what are we talking about on the show today?
Well, we're going to talk about St. Francis of Assisi, a guy who probably would have enjoyed good country music. I'm just guessing. So we're talking, of course, about sacrificial leadership. That's what we've been talking about all this year in 2022. So, of course, we're talking about saints that exemplify that sacrificial canonic leadership, pouring themselves out. And few other people do it like St. Francis, who the people of the time, and I think people since have pointed out, really an embodiment, a sort of not second coming of Jesus Christ, but a sort of Christ for that age, someone who radically threw himself into the poverty that it was to be like Christ. And that poverty, of course, is not just about how much money is in your checkbook, but your willingness to pour yourself out. So few people better to exemplify exemplify, I think, what we've been talking about than St. Francis of Assisi. You might think of him just as like the sort of nature-loving hippie that doesn't have anything to say about leadership, but I'm hoping we disprove that for you on the show today. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr talking about St. Francis and sacrificial leadership. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Dr. David Ball from Des Moines Eye Surgeons, your total eye care specialist specializing in cataracts and glaucoma care. Des Moines Eye Surgeons, 515-255-3546, dmisurgeons.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences, where you can chart your course for more.
They provide unparalleled clinical rotations, hands-on learning, accelerated education, and flexible schedules, all part of the Mercy College experience.
Learn more at mchs.edu.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Paul and Stephanie Dre, attorneys at Brick Gentry PC, a full-service law firm that provides legal services to individuals, businesses, and government entities. Learn more at brickgentrylaw.com. And thank you for your support of Iowa Catholic Radio.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Caldwell Parish Funeral Home and Crematory. Caldwell Parish offers services that are unique to the individual while following the Catholic funeral rites. Caldwell Parish Funeral Home and Crematory, Des Moines' only Catholic-owned and operated funeral home.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Deary of Ames, home of Warranty Forever, offering new, used, and commercial vehicles as well as service and Mopar parts. Deary of Ames is located just off of Highway 30 at the Dayton Avenue exit and online at DearyAmes.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Bell Construction. Bell Construction is a full-service residential and commercial roofing contractor in the Des Moines area since 1988. Bell Construction, 515-963-4494. Thank you, Bell Construction, for supporting Iowa Catholic Radio.
Back with The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show. We're going to be talking once more about saints that exemplify sacrificial leadership. It's not just not enough to be a leader. You want people who are even servant leaders, but the Catholic Church imagines that people need to be sacrificial leaders in imitation of Jesus Christ, that kenosis, that word that means self-emptying, leaders who pour themselves out. What does that mean, and what are the ramifications of that here in the real world? And so I like pointing out the saints because these are people that lived, but I also think it's important for us, Bud, to bring up saints that in some ways don't seem real anymore. They seem, as it were, too far afield to navigate what leadership should look like in modern day, capitalist, America, but the whole world, right? What are we going to do with this nature-loving hippie saint mystic who talked to birds and wolves? What does he really have to say to us who have to be leaders in today's world? And we're hoping that we can oppose that for people today. Not only because Francis, of course, by being well known for giving away the substantial wealth he had from his father, shows that kenosis, that outpour, like self-emptying, but that even in the episodes of his life that maybe are well known, there are things to very much apply in the here and now from St. Francis's life.
Yeah, I'm really intrigued by saints like St. Francis because I tend to be bookish and nerdy. So like a lot of my favorite saints are sort of like those who had these like great theological writings, like St. Thomas Aquinas, St. John Henry Newman, both very holy men. St. Francis is one of those saints that never wrote a word and yet had this profound impact on the future of the church. I think it's a testament to the radicality of his life and talking about sacrificial leadership, to the sacrifices that he made. And I think that's a great place to start, Bo. Like a lot of young men of the time, like Francis was, he was kind of drawn by the allurements of wealth and prestige. And like you said, his father had set him up to be well off. He was supposed to take over the family business. And there's an encounter with a leper that really changed the direction of Francis's life. He was always, before that time, kind of repulsed by lepers. And encountering this person who's like the true definition of poverty, both like physically, but also just in terms of like true economic poverty, Francis was compelled to give away all that he owned. And when he did so, his father got really upset and actually dragged him before a local magistrate. There's this great account of his father like demanding to the magistrate that Francis return what he had given away. And Francis, on that occasion, took off his cloak and said, now, like in this world, I own absolutely nothing. I have no father but my heavenly Father alone. And for myself, I've always found that story very challenging because a temptation for me is like not necessarily to like really compile like a ton of like great possessions. I don't own a boat or a jet ski
yet.
If someone wants to donate to the show, I'm
515-223-1150. Yeah.
But I am someone who's like, I kind of want like a certain sort of like stability or comfortability, you know? And so to hear about St. Francis' radicality and giving everything away, like that's a challenge because our Lord does have some strong words about that. And I think for myself, like the position that I'm in is I say like, I'll get comfortable and then I'll sort of like slowly dole things out when sometimes we just have to ask and like seek counsel from a spiritual director and say, are there things in my life that are like obstacles to doing God's will? And we might not view it that way, but you see someone like St. Francis, until he had let go of so much, he wasn't ready to serve God completely.
And what's interesting about that is I think people are tempted to think of Francis in very individualistic terms. Like, here's this dude who's sort of like a knight of faith, and he made this big sacrifice, and we know him for what he individually did. But what's very interesting is, so if you read something like The Little Flowers of St. Francis, probably one of the most famous, if not the most famous, accounts of his life, The Little Flowers of St. Francis does not start out very much with Francis. It actually talks about his disciples that followed him. And the reason I think this is interesting, you brought up, he didn't write anything down. And he also wasn't some brilliant man. He wasn't like a scholar. In fact, it might even be the case that he was sort of really leaning into being a fool. Like maybe he could have been more bookish if he wanted to. Yeah. But what's interesting is he didn't get like 12 disciples that were very much like him. He got very different people immediately in his sort of train where, like, for instance, an old count who had tons of money, who was considered a gentleman, who became a radical friar, right, who begged for everything, but precisely because he had sort of a way in, a life in that sort of aristocratic world of Italy. He was sort of the gentleman beggar, right? On the other hand, he had someone who was a mystic. He had someone who was extremely intelligent, who immediately founded universities. All of these people who, because Francis negated himself, allowed them to shine in ways that even though we're prone to think of, his not schismata. What am I trying to think of?
Stigmata.
Stigmata. Thank you. Gee whiz. Or even the stuff like talking to the animals. For the people and the Franciscans, it was his sort of being willing to be negated that allowed them to shine. To actually steal a poem from Eastern thought, it's like Francis was the hole in the middle of a wheel that allowed the whole wheel to spin, and his disciples were the spokes that came, from the fact that he poured himself in that way. So it's not just that, it's like you said, but he had radical faith, and he personally was willing to give up his father's fortune. He was also willing to give it up because, you'd think, all that, maybe he just like works for his dad and he has money and he doles it out, like you said. But because he gave that all up, the riches of his disciples were able to shine through. The little flowers are actually the people that bloomed because of St. Francis. And I think all leaders need to see that it's sometimes what we give up, how we're willing to be vulnerable and weak as leaders that allow others to shine in ways that they wouldn't be able to unless we were willing to get out of the way, as it were, like St. Francis.
Well, and that's why St. Francis is such a great saint for this series where we're talking about sacrificial leadership. He's the rare saint where we have 2 days on the calendar remembering his life and his testimony, because you have the feast day of St. Francis of Assisi. We also celebrate the occasion upon which he received the stigmata. Mm-hmm. And, Bo, this takes me all back to our conversation with Father Michael Geisler recently, where he talked about like our role in sort of like God's plan of salvation. And we use language of like co-redemption, or we speak of the stigmata, this idea that some saints have actually like taken on the wounds of Christ in their body. And I'll tell you, if you start talking about that, like on the train, on the ride to work or whatever, like some people are going to be like, taken aback. I know in conversations with some of my Protestant relatives, it all seems foreign and strange. If that comes up, let folks know this has like a strong, even biblical pedigree. Like St. Paul talks about bearing the marks of Christ in his body. Mm. But with both of those saints, with Paul and with St. Francis of Assisi, with St. Gemma, who one of my daughters is named after, the idea is that they became so closely conformed to Christ that they actually like physically or tangibly took on the marks that Christ did. It's not a source of like pride or like a medal that they wear, but it's really just like this absolute complete conformity. And what's interesting in bringing up all three of those saints is they lived in very different times and they lived very different kinds of life. And so conformity to Christ doesn't necessarily mean like which circumstances am I placed in, or is like it's only for these people and not those people. It's fidelity in the station of life in which God has placed you. And this kind of like we, as Father Michael Geisler mentioned a little while back, like we're placed on the altar as well. Like we actually participate in Christ's offering, not because it lacks anything, but because God has called us to be co-workers in the vineyard.
Absolutely. You know, I've always, of course, I'm a big Thomas Aquinas fan. He's a Dominican, but one of my favorite literary praises of St. Francis of Assisi, Dante in the Paradise has Thomas Aquinas the Dominican praise St. Francis, and then he has St. Bonaventure the Franciscan praise St. Dominic. And Thomas Aquinas' sort of ode to St. Francis is not like, oh, he was really ascetical, which of course he was, or, oh, not even that, the nature stuff or all these things like this. He said, actually, the Middle Ages were they wanted to find a great lover, a troubadour, right? An actual poet who actually was a romantic, right? The courtly love tradition. And Dante here goes, look at St. Francis alone, who Christ himself considered a lover who could love his bride, Lady Poverty. And, so having Thomas Aquinas, who's known for his, like, proofs of God and all these things, wax eloquent about this man who was sort of a troubadour for Lady Poverty, that he fell in love in a way that only Christ could love Lady Poverty more, right? Like the one who, so to speak, stayed at the cross with everyone else. And that love of poverty, again, is not just a sort of wearing that sign or a badge. It's, like you said, marked in the skin, like that we're willing to follow Christ to that depth, and that it doesn't look like a calculation, or it doesn't even look, mystically like spiritual Olympics. It's something much more akin to a love song, that you have to love that willingness to be sacrificial. And if you read St. Francis, that's actually what comes through. In many ways, he's goofy sometimes. In many ways, he sort of needs to learn to not be so hard on himself. But what he gets right is that love it takes to love Lady Poverty, and thus Christ to be one who, as you say, has that stigmata, wears the wounds of Christ in his very being. This is The Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr. Stick around and we'll talk a little bit more about St. Francis as an example of sacrificial leadership. This is The Uncommon Good, and we'll be back right after this.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Bows and the Florist. Valentine's Day, Mother's Day, weddings, whatever the message, say more with Bosun. Bosun.com, 515-244-ROSE. Bosun makes the moment mean more.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by CTO. What great news for donors to the Catholic Tuition Organization. You now receive 75% of your donation back in Iowa tax credits. Your support has helped thousands of students attend our Catholic schools. Best gift ever. Online, ctoiowa.org. At CTO, the bottom line, it's for the kids and their future.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Will's Family Orchard, located at 33130 Panther Creek Road, just outside of Adel. Apple and Pumpkin Fest weekends run September 17th through October 23rd, with fun farm activities for all ages. Learn more at willsfamilyorchard.com.
St. Vincent de Paul helps so many people.
You're right, Zoe. St. Vincent de Paul Executive Director Steve Havman here. We are serving over 32,000 local residents with food, clothing, furniture, and financial assistance annually. We invite you to learn more about all of our life-changing programs that positively impact so many Iowans by simply Googling St. Vincent de Paul of Des Moines. Our mission is to help those in need become self-sufficient through education, community connectedness, and unconditional support. Help us, help others.
Even kids!
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Golden Rule, always seeking to serve customers better and to create job opportunities within the community. So with the new electrical division, Golden Rule now services all home maintenance concerns. Learn more at goldenrulephc.com.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio is provided by Paul Martin and Paul Mitchell, owners of Imogene Ingredients. Imogene Ingredients supply specialized feed ingredients for livestock and pet diets to improve maternal and young animal health in both conventional and organic production.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio comes from Will's Family Orchard, located at 33130 Panther Creek Road, just outside of Adel. Apple and Pumpkin Fest weekends run September 17th through October 23rd, with fun farm activities for all ages. Learn more at willsfamilyorchard.com.
Back to the Uncommon Good. Bo Bonner, Dr. Bud Marr, joining you this Wednesday. Thank you for listening to the show. Finishing up today's episode, we're talking about St. Francis of Assisi as a model for sacrificial leadership, what we've been talking about for this 2022 year. So, Bud, I think the last episode to talk about, there's too much, but we'd be remiss, I should say, if we were talking about St. Francis' leadership, we didn't talk about that iconic moment where Christ told him to rebuild his church, and sort of like St. Peter before him, radically misunderstood what the Lord meant at first before being shown what he totally meant.
Yeah, there's a pattern in the Gospels of sometimes like Jesus' followers taking his words a bit too literally, and we're sort of prone to this. Now, Jesus, I don't think, was about like overly spiritualizing things, but there's a way as human beings where like we can sort of set limits to what God's doing when God's vision is bigger than ours. You see this with St. Francis because when he receives this word from God, rebuild my church, at first, initially, he thinks that it's about building like a physical building, like restoring the church in Assisi. And, well, I mean, honestly, there is a beautiful basilica there today. But over time, as St. Francis chews on this and meditates on this, he realizes that God is calling him to rebuild his church like more globally. And I think for all of us, we need to have that perspective, Bo. Like there's the nuts and bolts of asking God, like, how am I faithful in my marriage, in my job, in these like various like gifts or talents that God brings along our way. But we also have to say, God, what are you calling to me even beyond these things, and be open to the movement of providence on with respect to that question, because this gets back to the whole notion of detachment. Like sometimes we can think like when God's calling us, it's that I'm supposed to have this job in this city and do this thing. And that may be the case, but there's a way where we could sort of like cling to that and limit what God is actually doing in our lives.
No, I think that's a great point. Because there's one way in which I almost want to push back and go, well, actually, isn't it the problem that most of us have a very abstract notion of, oh, fix my church, like listen to the right people on the radio, or, do this or that correctly. Don't you need to get practical? But you hit the nail on the head. The problem starts to be, we go, oh, I'm going to rebuild the church, God. I'm going to do what you say, and I know what you mean, right? It's this, and I'm going to grasp onto it. And God's like, no. If you will let go of the reins and hand them over to me, what I mean by you, for Francis, to rebuild the church, it's going to be seismic. There'll just be no stopping what you're going to do. So he meets us where we're at. Francis wasn't, as we pointed out, he had a big conversion. He had to learn what it meant to be St. Francis, to be the guy walking around with the stigmata. And so, of course, he's like, well, yeah, this place is a dump. I should make it look a little better. And then God, as patient as he is, goes, no, you'll be surprised by what I mean. Fix this church. So I think a lot of us can start to think about that as leaders. We're often called as leaders to immediately be about helping some issue, right? Mm-hmm. That's one thing. Becoming a leader, I realize that you're a leader now. Here's the problem we're dealing with. And, of course, we got to attend to it. But the attention, right, behind, okay, this is the entry into what God has in mind for you. But don't, like you said, narrowly hold on too tight to that to act like that will exhaust what God has as a plan for you as a leader.
Yeah, G.K. Chesterton in his book on Francis and St. Thomas, he says, like, God tends to provide the saint that each age needs. Mm-hmm. And so in our own time, I think that still remains to be seen. But I think we can always go back to St. Francis as a perennial example. And I think, again, Bo, about, like, the particular temptations in our society. Like, look, St. Francis gave away all that he had, and he embraced total poverty, and he was willing to be a fool for Christ. And in our day and age, when we hear those sorts of things, we're like, man, that guy does not sound successful at all. And yet, because he was willing to become like a living sacrifice, like the impact of his life is just so far reaching, but it's only through turning himself over completely to God and to God's will that took place.
I think that's the final thing I'd like to end on is St. Francis, so many times we're trying to pigeonhole him. So like what he did with that message, he's like, oh, you mean just rebuild this church, but it's actually the medieval church. We do that with St. Francis, like, oh, he's the hippie, he's the nature guy, he's the environment guy, he's the love guy. And weirdly enough, it's right where we don't think that he's a certain way that he'll surprise us. Like we didn't even get to talk about him going and talking to the Muslim armies where, there's like that whole episode. One I think about is how liturgical Francis was. And he's not a priest either, but like how big of a deal the liturgy is. And I think that gets to it. But that sacrifice, he wanted to be a living sacrifice so that his Franciscans could be, offering a living sacrifice on those altars. Well, this is the Uncommon Good. May Jesus Christ, the Prince of Peace, reign in our hearts, family, city, state, nation, world, solar system, galaxy, the whole kit and caboodle. This is the Uncommon Good, and we'll be back next week. But if folks want to be a part of the prayer life here in Iowa Catholic Radio, what are ways they can do so?
Yeah, please join us in praying for our diocese, the city, the country, God's work in the church by joining us in prayer. We broadcast the Rosary at 6 in the morning and 10 in the morning. We broadcast the Divine Mercy Chaplet at 2:55 p.m., and folks can use the Iowa Catholic Radio app anytime, anywhere to pray the Rosary.
We're running out of time, so I'll make it very easy for you folks. The thing you want to go to, right? September 24th and 25th, Christ Our Life Conference here at Wells Fargo Arena. Guest Father John Ricardo, Chris Stefanik, Matt Frad, Patricia Sandoval, all sorts of people. You want to make sure to be a part of that. And then please keep in mind our fall fundraiser, which will be happening October 3rd through 8th. You can donate at any time. Of course, we're always willing to accept your gifts so we can keep this ministry on air. 515-223-1150 or go to iowacatholicradio.com or the Iowa Catholic Radio app to donate. But fall fundraiser October 3rd, that week. Keep that in mind. This is the Uncommon Good. Bud, take her easy. We'll be back next week.
The Uncommon Good with Bo Bonner and Dr. Bud Marr is heard every week on wonderful Catholic stations like this one and anytime on podcast. Just search for The Uncommon Good.
Support for Iowa Catholic Radio and The Uncommon Good provided by Mercy College of Health Sciences. Learn more at mchs.edu.